death is really the opposite of being born. Life, living is what we do in between.
Welcome to the Legacy Branding Podcast. I'm your host, Laura Beauparlant, here to guide you through the journey of selling your business and building a personal brand that leaves a lasting impact. On the show, we'll explore real-life founder stories, expert insights, and actionable strategies to help you navigate the transition, avoid post-sale crisis, and create your impact-driven legacy brand. Whether you're thinking of selling, building to sell, or already on the other side, this podcast is your go-to resource for making your next evolution your best one yet. Let's dive in. Today, I'm super honored to have our client and someone I call a friend, Dina Bell-Laroche, to the Legacy Branding Podcast. Dina's journey through grief and loss after the loss of her sister, Tracy, in 2001 has transformed her into a powerful advocate for a humanistic approach to grief and loss. As a death educator, grief doula, keynote speaker, and the author of Grief Unleashed, Moving from the Hole in Our Hearts to Wholehearted, Dina's mission is to help people reimagine their relationship with loss. With a background in high-performance sport and her extensive studies in thanatology, Dina combines wisdom, empathy, and practical guidance to support those navigating grief. Welcome to the show, Dina.
Oh, I'm so delighted to be here. Anytime I get to spend time with you, dear Laura, it's just, it's a good time well spent.
What can I say? I work with amazing clients. So, you're on that roster.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here.
So you are still working as a partner in sport law. And I wanted to ask you, and I think a lot of people have a bit of, I don't want to call it a side hustle, but they have these two things, this work that they do in one area, and then this maybe passion project or something they want to get started, or maybe they've already started it. So wanted to ask how you manage building Grief Unleashed while continuing your work as a partner with sport law, and what challenges and rewards come from balancing both of these roles?
That's a beautiful question. And I would say that, Grief Unleashed, en français, on dit c'est plus fort que moi, which means I couldn't not start to do this work, this soul work. And so as I was listening to this yearning I had inside of me, and you were part of that trajectory where putting a brand to what was unleashing inside of me made it real in a really substantive and meaningful way. So launching the brand and all that beautiful work that we did together, and then seeing it in a beautiful website in the internet where people could Google me and see the range of services that I provide, made it real and tangible for me. And then, of course, the book, and having been on a book tour this last year, affirmed the need for people to have someone witness their pain and to normalize and humanize, not pathologize, this natural experience that we go through when our attachment is severed, right?
Yeah.
Which is loss. So I would say it sometimes a little challenging because my heart really now is in the world of grief and loss, which there's a lot of it in sport. So I'm doing a lot more work now supporting clients who either have a death-related loss. I just supported a club whose young athlete died tragically and suddenly in a bike accident. Help them map out what is our plan here to support the players, the family members, the executive, the coaches, right? Really the affected people, and doing so in a way that aligns with our values. And because most of us have not really experienced death-related losses, we used to know how to do this grief work because it was around us. Death was around us. But we tend to be more in denial of death as a society. Most of us, maybe we've lost a grandparent by the time we're 40, but many of my clients, they are experiencing loss for the first time, or what they're realizing is this big loss is underneath it is a mountain of unreconciled losses. So by the time the one that breaks the camel's back, they don't know who they are anymore. Yeah. So I would say that my work in sport is still so deeply fulfilling and meaningful. And right alongside that is this emerging vocational soul work that I spend dedicated time in this space because it really is so deeply meaningful and a way for me to continue my bond with my sister Tracy and now my deceased dad Mike.
Right. What a gift you are to the world of sport that you found a way to merge these two worlds together. And there is such a need for everybody to understand there are many different ways to grieve. There's no right or wrong way to grieve. And we're kind of in some ways taught how to do it or maybe not, like we're supposed to hide it. And so I think what you're doing and how you're integrating that into the work you do at Sport Law is such a beautiful gift you're sharing rather than saying, okay, I'm going to dive full time into this and leave Sport Law behind, which some people do, right? They leave a business or they leave corporate, they start something new, but it feels like you've managed to bridge those two worlds and create a schedule and a life and work that you love to do.
Yeah, I would also say that for me, integrating grief into my language, it has created a new way for me to show up with my clients and they can feel me feeling them, being able to ask a question that had I not have all this training inside of me and this lived experience, I know for sure I wouldn't have found the courage because it takes courage to say to someone, can we just pause here? It looks like you might be grieving.
Mm.
It sounds like you might be grieving this loss of identity or this loss of friendship or this loss, the survivor guilt, for instance, of you making the team and your best friend being cut. And just even notice, right, the language we use, cut, right?
Yeah.
Like we have such violent language that I'm really trying to pay attention to and challenge in a system that was driven by a military model that informed corporate right language around targets and bullet points and all of this trigger. Like think of trigger, I'm being triggered. Well, trigger is what we pull to cause harm to someone, as opposed to language that isn't so harmful, like I'm activated in this moment, I can feel my energy being challenged by what it is that you're sharing. So I have found that my grief and loss literacy has supported my capacity to show up for my clients in a really beautiful way. And they feel that.
Wow. I had no idea that I mean, it makes total sense that you describe those as being military terms being brought into a corporate setting and how we use them all the time without thinking about where they actually stem from and that there perhaps is a better word to use that isn't, as violent. Yeah.
Right? Yeah, like our words shape our world.
Mhm.
This deep need now that I'm seeing emerge, especially with younger people. I'm the parent of three young adults, right? 19, 22, and 24. So they are my teachers. And they are not swallowing what it is that we're shoving down their throats. They are pushing back and saying, I'm not going to take what you are giving me because I see the harm that it's causing. And so they're speaking truth to power. And that's what's needed now, I think, Laura, more than ever, is for people, like if you really are going to spend the time and the money and the effort to put out your brand into the world,
Yeah.
right? Which is your promise. Here's who I am. Here's what I believe is. Here's what I'm trying to sell or promote. If you don't have that authenticity internally and your systems and processes and policies, your culture isn't in alignment with that brand, gone are the days where people would just tolerate that and not speak out. People now are speaking out and saying, you're not being genuine. People want authenticity. And I would say that having now companioned hundreds of people through their grief and loss journey, people, when you speak that language of authenticity and you meet them in their suffering, intimacy is forged, loyalty is created. A loss informed lens helps us understand that it's based on attachment. And we know and understand attachment theory. We can use bereavement theory and attachment theory to understand why people feel so attached to their teammates, or in the case of corporate, to their employees and their colleagues and their identity and their security and their financial health. And then all of a sudden they're leaving. And even when they decide, okay, I'm done, I'm retiring, which I call renewalment, not retirement,
I like that.
right? Even when we self-author our future, we are likely going to experience deep sorrow, some deeper than others, because it's a whole, we're in transition. I'm no longer the Dina with the title and the office and the identity and the travel budget and the business card. I'm stumbling towards someone new.
Yeah. What I think is interesting that you're talking about is I think a lot of people associate grief and loss with death. And you weren't just talking about death there. Like death is one piece of it, but it is that death of an identity or the loss of a coworker or a teammate. And we don't always think about these things as maybe significant, and yet they are. They can leave a mark, especially when it's somebody that is close to us, or if it's a colleague, you may have spent more time with that person than your spouse because you were spent 8 hours a day with them. And if they suddenly are gone, it leaves a hole, and you have to figure out now what to do with that. And that is grief that they would be experiencing, would it not?
Well, exactly. So we talk about finite losses, so death related losses, and we can wrap our mind around that, right? It can also be, as we've just talked about, the loss of identity, the loss of dreams, the loss of relationships. Those losses sit alongside maybe a primary loss. There are secondary and tertiary losses that ripple out. Well, sometimes the rippling out is worse than the primary reason that I have this experience of grief,
Yeah.
right? So it can be really complex. And when we don't have a society, I'm typically situating our conversation in our North American way of being with grief and loss. Other cultures know and understand this. They understand how to be with life when it goes sideways. We tend to be very transactional, tend to be focused on the future, and tend to dismiss anything that we see as suffering, because your suffering makes me uncomfortable. And I'm not good with this reminder that at some point I'm going to die or my life can go sideways too. So we make it about us when in reality, the person who's suffering really wants it to be about them. Can you
Yeah.
feel the messy waters that we're in?
Absolutely. And that's why the work that you do is so important. And so I want to know, how do you see the work you're doing in grief and loss and grief education and advocacy contributing to your legacy? And really, what does legacy mean to you?
Well, for me, the word legacy really became online for me after Tracy died. And so I'm taking us back 23 years ago, and I didn't really ever my legacy. I mean, it mattered to me that I was doing really good work, that I was a good person, that I was giving back, that I was living like a pretty much normal, simple life. When Tracy died, it became so important for me that she not be forgotten.
Yeah.
So legacy is really about, how do we stay connected? How do we create an imprint of who we were? And when we have out of order deaths, so when Tracy was 29 and we were both brand new moms, those kind of traumatic death experiences really leave it's like a crater, right? And it takes a while for that crater to grow and to shift over time. And it's by nurturing the crater, not by walking around it all the time, that you actually can give it space and time to heal. So in grief education, we talk about continuing bonds. And continuing bonds is a beautiful theory that reminds us that just because the person dies doesn't mean that our relationship with them has to die too.
Mm.
For children and youth, it's imperative, we would say, that they continue to understand, in the case of my nephew, that his mom, her name was Tracy Lee Bell, and she was a beautiful human who loved to work with young offenders. She was a ballet dancer up until she was 17, so it was like her middle name could have been Grace. She was a lot of fun. She was mischievous and she loved him. She called him her little monkey man. And her last words were really about him and taking care of him. Well, he's a father now. He just had a baby boy. And as I was holding him in my arms, I was thinking about my sister's a grandmother. And my mom is a great grandmother. So even though she's not here the way we would want her to be, she's here. She's continuing her legacy through Liam and through me, her sister, and through her nieces and nephew. Like she continues to ripple out through stories and anecdotes and her picture, right? Her death day, her birthday, her favorite color. These are healthy ways for us to weave the tapestry of our lives, even after we've taken our last breaths, so that the people that matter most to us can continue to be nourished by those continuing bonds. And so grief and loss literacy for me is about empowerment, it's education, and it will help to ease the suffering. One of the I'd say the most common emotion that surfaces for people when I'm supporting them is relief. You mean I'm not crazy, they say. Like, well, it sounds like you're grieving. And yes, you might need the support of a therapeutic alliance that's beyond what I offer. I'm not a counselor or a therapist. I'm a certified thanatologist and an integral master coach. So I have all of these competencies, but my fundamental worldview is for the most part, bereaved people, it isn't therapy that they need, although therapy can be very, very helpful. Often what they need is a companion. And all of us can learn the art of companioning, which is what is having my soul on fire.
Yeah.
Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
And I think the way I see as an outsider looking in, a part of your legacy is keeping Tracy's legacy alive. And I think you're doing that beautifully just by talking about what her favorite color was and those adjectives like mischievous and that she did ballet. Like, I think a lot of people just stop talking about somebody when they've passed away, and you give her life. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And what I hear is that you're teaching other people that it's okay to talk about your loved ones who you've lost, and that it's actually honoring them to keep their legacy alive by talking about them and working through, or not even working through, but processing the grief that has been left behind because they're gone. And so I see your impact that you're creating is so powerful because it started with you and it's creating this beautiful ripple effect outwards.
Yeah, that's thank you for sharing that. And it's interesting how you asked me about my legacy, and I still have my reaction is to focus more on Tracy and others. And for me, though, the invitation is to live my life in alignment with my values of courage, compassion, and community. And this grief work just fills me up. I feel like I'm living into my full potential when I sit with people who are really interested in this work, and I bring both evidence, right, research informed, but also lived experience. And I think because of that, my legacy feels like I'm living into it now. So if I were to die now, I feel like I'm sure there's still more rocks to to turn over and experiences to be seeped in. And I really feel full of joy and appreciation for this trajectory that I've chosen. That was not an easy trajectory to be on. Let me just say that, right? I tend to be a bit of a poking of the bear kind of person, advocating for, values in the Canadian sports system long before it became popular, right? Trying to give expression to human potential, not in a, it's either the health of the athlete or it's winning medals. There's room for both. And I think that that's part of that same energy. Death is not the opposite of life. Death is really the opposite of being born. Life, living, is what we do in between. And so if we can remember that, it just brings us to the here and now in a really palpable way where you're feeling alive now in this moment with you. Not at some future state when I'll have more money or everything else. Like, this is the gift of this work. You start living life now, right?
Yep. Love it. Okay. So this grief work is important. And the people listening to this podcast will be entrepreneurs and founders. And how does working through grief help entrepreneurs show up more authentically and aligned in their business and their life, which ultimately will impact the legacy that they're building?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. I would say, I mean, depends on the entrepreneur and how secure they feel in their entrepreneurship. Because if you have a security blanket, as I did, my husband at the time, when I decided to become an entrepreneur, he had a full-time job as a pilot. So we had the safety net of medical assistance and all of that,
Yeah.
right? And we had 3 children, young children at the time. So not everybody has that. And I would say that the grappling that probably goes right alongside the I need to move into this entrepreneurial role because that's what my life is calling me towards. Right alongside that is, some life losses, tangible losses, like maybe financial security. And that is an important aspect which often limits people's capacity to choose. So I instead, put that on the shelf until all of these things come to pass. But as you and I know, 10, 15, 20 years happens in a blink of an eye. And so what I often hear people when they actually choose to step into entrepreneurial roles, I should have done it sooner, but I was so scared. And fear, right? Fear is a real thing around not being successful or using the same metrics of success when I had the safety net around me and I had the approval of society around me. There's a lot of letting go, I think, that entrepreneurial people kind of need to wrestle with. And then the identity losses of, I thought it was going to be like this, but entrepreneurs, as you know, spend a lot of time doing all the administrative work to try and be successful. And for most of us who are entrepreneurs, that's not what lights us up. We want to do the work,
Yep.
right?
We didn't start to do more
Uh-huh.
paperwork and all the admin things. Yeah.
Right? And that stuff is like soul sucking stuff for the entrepreneurial
Yeah.
spirit. We just want to do the creative work of bringing our brand and our dreams and our hopes and our aspirations to life. So I think what can help, especially for those that are leaving, let's say, a steady job and income and everything and moving into an entrepreneurial role, is ritual, ceremony. Can I actually do a ceremony around the professional me that I'm choosing to step away from and giving myself permission to grieve that identity? So ceremony for me is like the way through.
And I've definitely
Mm.
incorporated ceremony and ritual into my own life and in things we do as a family. When we actually were moving back from Sicily, we had a ceremony with a fire and we all wrote down things that we were taking home with us,
Yeah.
things we were going to wanting to do next, and what we were leaving
Mm.
behind. And we burned the
Hmm.
page that we were leaving behind. Of the
Yeah.
items, and we had a ceremony, we had music, and we just did that again at the end of the summer before the school year started to kind of acknowledge the change of season, the change going back to school, the end of the summer, the loss of like the sadness that can come, especially for kids of like summer's over and back to school, but what is now September bringing forward and who are you going to be next? And just seeing
Mhm.
that beauty in that small ceremony and the kids saying, "Oh, that was the song we listened to in Sicily. Let's put that one on again." And just the fact that they remembered the songs we listened to while we had that ceremony, to me was a beautiful reminder that one, this was a beautiful thing we were doing together, but it was also we were on our own individual journey in that experience of what we were leaving behind. And we didn't even have to share it with each other. It was for
Mhm.
each one of us. And so that's just a small
Mhm.
example for me how incorporating that little ceremony of like acknowledging where you've come, how far you've come perhaps, and celebrating that, because I think it's easy for, especially for entrepreneurs, to just be on to the next. You're like, okay, I hit this target, right? Or this goal, or whatever you want to call it. And now it's on to the next. And we don't take the time to acknowledge and celebrate the wins or grieve the losses. And I think
Mm-hmm.
there's finding a balance with those two things, and doing both of those, which I think often get missed because we're so busy getting on to the next thing that we don't take time to acknowledge the wins and the losses.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. It's I call that conscious completion.
That's beautiful.
Can right? Can I consciously complete my experience with a client who I adore? Or maybe I've had a not so great experience. And so there's a sense of it's, that one I'm happy that that's completing.
Yeah.
Don't let the door hit you.
Yep.
Right. And as entrepreneurs, the cadence, the rhythm is up and down. So there's loss that we accumulate all the time. And sometimes people, again, we want to revert back to the griefarchy. Well, that's just life, Dina. I'm like, yeah. But with ritual and ceremony, we can make life a little less arduous and painful.
Yeah.
With the pandemic, so many people were now indoctrinated to the world of entrepreneurship because they were working from home, living from home. Many people picked up bad habits,
Yep.
right? And so creating these healthy boundaries between my work persona and my partner persona and my friend persona and my parent persona is really, really important. So I remember with a client who was like, she was on the verge of burnout. So she was just so deeply fatigued. So we created a practice for her at the end of the day before her children came in, because they were now starting to say, Mom, like, you're not available to us. So 10 minutes before the kids would come, she would close down everything that she was doing, leave her office, go outside, and then come in, and then go upstairs and change. So she was in her comfy clothes and then ready to receive her kids who wanted her full attention. So something like these micro practices, kind of like brushing our teeth, we can do with intention and attention.
I love it.
And when we do that, we're like, oh, okay, now I'm mom,
Yep.
right? And I'm going to step into that role fully. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Oh, Dina,
Mm-hmm.
always such a great conversation with you. People can learn so much from you, and I know you have amazing resources. So I would love for you to share where people can learn more and subscribe to your Substack and connect with you to find out more information.
So, Grief Unleashed, the book is available, and you can find that on my beautiful website.
Designed by Lab
that
Creative.
that's
Shameless
right,
plug.
designed by the amazing Laura and Maria and your amazing team. And then also my Substack is called The Grieving Place. And thank you also for your help in kind of setting that up. I really love that I have a place to share our work, and so people can find out a little bit more about me there, and access my writing and my video blog. Those are probably two of the ways they can connect with me.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being a guest, Dina, and keep on building that beautiful legacy.
Well, thank you for being my journey mate on this journey I'm on, Laura.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for tuning into the Legacy Branding Podcast. I hope today's episode has inspired and empowered you on your journey to building a brand that truly matters. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with other founders who you think would benefit from listening. And if you're ready to take the next step in building your legacy brand, visit our website, labcreative.ca, to learn more and book a call. Don't forget to join us next time for more conversations that will help you navigate your transition and create your legacy. Until then, I'm Laura Beauparlant.